another training vlog. It is deadlift day, it is Tuesday. Training this week so far has been going really well. So we're into the business end of this training block, into week 5. Already hit a squat PB. I'm on my way in now to deadlift. If I hit my top set, it will be a 5 kilo PB as well. And you know what? It's nice to have this feeling again like I am progressing. I think I went through a long time when it's just regaining body weight post prep of not really feeling like I was making much progress and just like regaining lost strength. So it's really nice to be in a position where now I feel like I'm actually making progress once again, and I'm actually surpassing my old self, right? Because like ultimately, whether you are process oriented or not, as a powerlifter, as a bodybuilder, you want to see your muscles getting bigger, you want to see your total going up, or you want to be getting rep PBs. You do care about that stuff. As we are in week 5 of the block now as well, I have definitely went about this block better than I went about the previous block. One thing that bodybuilding made me worse at was pacing my blocks. When I was going through my bodybuilding prep, I was pretty much treating every single session like it was my last one. So I was going as hard as I could in every single one. Whereas when it does come to strength and building that, pacing the block is important, and not necessarily starting off at a point where you're hitting these like 9-10 RPEs on a weekly basis, and realistically even hitting 10 RPE on any kind of lift really when it does come to your squat, bench, deadlift is probably not going to be the best protocol when it does come to building strength. So last block I started off way too heavy on the likes of my bench as well as the likes of my deadlift, and what happened was I just kept missing reps because I was too stubborn to actually take weight off the bar. As opposed to this block, I started off in all of my lifts pretty light and just built up from there. Now, even though I started off light, the actual intensity that's hitting was still around at 8 RPE, and this is because after a period of like deloading, for example, after my pivot week, you were going to lose a tiny bit of strength during a deload or a pivot week. Ideally, you don't want to lose any more than 5%. And as a result, when you go back to hitting, say for example, a set of 5 at an 8, where you are when you are 100% peaked to after a deload, they're not necessarily the same strength, right? Because we understand when we start off a peak, we start off the peak weaker and we finish stronger, because you're building these neural adaptations. So that's essentially what we're trying to do when it does come to pacing a block. We want to start off light relative to what your actual kind of rep max may be, because you are deconditioned to an extent, and then we want to build up the weight week on week as you adapt. But you only add load as you are adapting, especially if you're keeping a static RPE like my training program is keeping me. Now, if you do have a dynamic RPE where 1 week you're doing 7, then 1 week you're doing 8, then 1 week you're doing 9, of course you can add way more load depending on how you are adapting and how you're progressing. However, again, if you're keeping a fixed RPE, some weeks that just means you're going to have to go down, stay the same, or increase if you're adapting correctly, which is really going to be dependent on a lot of things, but recovery makes for a big part of that, which I wasn't doing adequately in the last block. However, this block, I'm much more on point. I'm going to finish my pre-workout, going to get into the gym, and then we're going to focus, and then I might talk a little bit more. All right, what just happened? Recording this 2 days later. I just haven't really had a chance to sit down and talk to the camera after that session there. So I didn't quite get much content recorded inside the gym other than my lift because it was busy, all right? How do you talk to a camera in a gym when there's like 5 other people there? Like, surely I should just talk to them, which is exactly what I did. Like, if it'd been somewhere like Pure Muscle, for example, and there is heaps of people in there, which I'm not talking to, fair enough. However, in a small gym, you know, if it's a community-based gym, you may as well speak to people who are in there as opposed to just speaking to a camera. So that session did not turn out the way I wanted to. 255 for 4, I was meant to get 5, and yeah, I mean, like, look, I can't really kind of say too much about why it happened. I think what did happen was my positioning was just slightly off. If you kind of look at that video, which I'll put up on the screen again, I looked like I was kind of a little bit further away from the bar than usual, and so I got that for 4. On the 4th rep, I lost my bracing a little bit, and then as a result of losing my bracing, that last rep I was just like, oh, I don't know if I could get to the 5th, especially because as a result of losing my bracing, my grip started to slip. Finished that. I did actually do a second set of it because it was like, I didn't feel too fatigued after it. However, I said I would try to do it again. Went to do it again, and I was just a little bit too tired. So 5th rep wasn't there, but doing 255 for 2 sets of 4, I've only ever done it once for 1 set of 4, so it's a PB in that respect, right? So you have to kind of take those kind of wins, even though it's not necessarily what I was aiming for. And this is one thing I was thinking about, was like, your expectation of how training is going to go is going to influence your perception of the outcome so much. So say, for example, last block I had deadlifts for set of 4, and when I was doing sets of 4 in deadlift, the heaviest I went last block was 250, and I actually failed 250 a few times last block as a result of not being recovered enough, increased the load faster than I should have, as well as just my technique not being great on those days either. Considering that, doing 255 for 4, even once, this block should be a little bit of a win, but because I didn't do for 5 like I said in the plan, again, I just don't necessarily perceive it to be as much of a win. However, this comes to the important discussion as to how do you approach bad training sessions, or what do you do after them. So naturally enough, after not hitting the 5th rep like I was expecting to, after having a great session on the Sunday with both bench as well as squat, I was expecting to do deadly on the likes of my deadlift, especially since it progressed so nicely the previous week. So the way I typically would go about this is, I'll be annoyed initially. Of course, I care about my training. If I didn't get annoyed in some respect about not living up to my expectations, you know, like, maybe then I just wasn't as into doing the set as I should have been, right? So if you notice that after a set you miss it and you don't really care at all, yeah, maybe your head just actually wasn't in that set, and maybe that's why you missed it. However, I did care about it, and it pissed me off, hence why I went to do it a second time, which from a fatigue management perspective is not a great choice really, and it was actually kind of a decision based off emotion rather than logic, because after hitting that second set on the Wednesday, I was fucked. I was like so tired, didn't want to train, had a shit sleep, back felt wrecked. So yeah, from a fatigue management perspective, definitely not the best option. But look, I did it, and so be it. I live with the consequences, which was being tired yesterday, and potentially now when I'm going to train today, my performance not being as good as it potentially can be. However, I'm not going to expect that. I'm going to still go in with the expectation of being able to lift as heavy as I can today. However, I am going to just see how warm-ups feel. If warm-ups are feeling very heavy, I'll just take a little bit of load reduction on the bar and deal with the consequences of my silly actions. So after being a little bit of a moody bitch from not living up to my expectations and, you know, not getting 5 reps, what do? Do you let that bleed into the rest of your exercise on that day? Probably wouldn't be the best idea, you know, because like realistically, it's one exercise, it's one set. You have the rest of the session to still do really well on, right? And ultimately, if you are going to be training for a long time, you missing a set, you like not doing well in a particular exercise, like it's simply just information. Like it's just telling you something. Like the thing that told me is like, okay, maybe if my idea on my positioning was correct, maybe I just need to stand a little bit closer to the bar, pay more attention to that next week. Maybe I need to consider my recovery symptoms leading into the session. Is there anything around that I potentially could be doing better? Are there kind of differences in the scenarios, in the environment, in the setting at which I performed it that I could potentially just modify, right? Maybe next week I train with a little bit more kind of food inside me. I make sure I don't necessarily get up earlier than I have to, and as a result potentially perform better. This information of did I achieve the task or not, when you don't achieve it, you just have to think about, okay, like, was it something that I could potentially control by controlling the environment, controlling the variables a little bit more accurately, or is it something that the strength is maybe just not there? Like maybe that is the case, the strength is just not there. However, based off how 250 moved the previous week, I would assume that it was more down to environmental factors, positioning factors, and that kind of stuff, right? So now next week, I know what I need to do better, and I'm going to do better. And to be honest, dealing with a bad session is not unlike dealing with a bad day. It's not unlike failing on another kind of goal. So say, for example, if I'm working with clients and they're looking to improve their nutrition, and we say, okay, we want you to hit a certain amount of calories per week or hit calories within a certain target, and they come to me the next week and they say that they have not hit the calorie target, they haven't hit it within the kind of certain parameters that we kind of agreed upon, then the question for them is, how can we solve that from happening again in the future? The answer to the question is not, I'll just try again next week. In my case here, I could say, I will just try again next week, but it's not necessarily going to be the best port of call. Because if I say I'm just going to try it again next week without really coming up with some type of plan of action to actually achieve that, like I just mentioned there, okay, what I did wrong, could I have done better? Is there anything that I did incorrectly the last time that I need to pay more attention to? Going through this kind of iterative process of like, what are the actual factors that I can change, control, and as a result impact my implementation, that is the way for me to essentially get better. So if you were struggling to stick to a nutritional target, stick to a goal, again, ask yourself the same questions. Is there anything you can control to make your ability to achieve the goal more realistic? Is there anything in your implementation you need to change? Or if that goal is out of reach or not within your capabilities at the moment, let's make that goal easier. So in my case, if 255 is too damn heavy, I take weight off the bar and I do 252 or I do 250. And that is the case. So that is the case of you changing your perspective and changing your attitude in regards to the actual approach. Because look, ultimately we can all set pretty high goals for ourselves, but if they're not within the realms of possibility for us, if they're outside of our capabilities, well then, you know, it could just lead to frustration, right? Because it would be very frustrating for me to just believe that I was like able to hit a certain weight and going in there and failing again. That does nothing for my motivation. It will actually just make me not enjoy training. And that is the same problem that a lot of people find themselves in when it does come to any type of goal, is they set themselves a goal that's outside their capabilities, and as a result they are overreaching themselves, they're struggling to stick to a plan, they're struggling to achieve their targets, and as a result getting extremely unmotivated because they are just not living up to what their expectations are. We want to feel like we're getting closer to a goal, and we don't want to necessarily feel like we're just going to go around in circles. And one way we can do that is just to ensure that we do have, again, a plan of action to where we need to go. We've thought about what we could do better, and we just actually start implementing it. Sometimes that means your ego needs to take a little bit of a hit, but that is okay, because ultimately we're not here to just boost our egos. We're here to make progress, we're here to make gains. So anyway, I'm gonna get my hair cut, so I'm up at the moment, so I'll catch you in the next video. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you enjoyed the rant, and yeah, we'll chat soon.